So my name is Cindy McLagan. I've been with John A. Knutson for about 6 years now. I work with estates and trusts and other, individual taxes. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to choose a personal representative for your estate. So our agenda today is generally we're going to talk about what is a personal representative, what do they do, why is it an important decision, and should you choose someone who is a family member or an outside person, and then what should you do after you've chosen this person, and what are the issues. And then at the very end, I'll talk a little bit about professional fiduciaries and if that's an option for you, because that is for a lot of people. So what is a personal representative? So basically, it's kind of an umbrella term for an executor or an administrator. And so, people will you'll hear them interchange. You'll hear personal rep, you'll hear executor, you'll hear administrator. The only thing that they are not is a personal representative is not a trustee. And I'll get to that further along in this slide. So an executor or a personal rep is named in the will. So if you have a will, then you're the administrator. If you have a will, then you have named an executor or a personal rep, and they will be given a letter testamentary that will give them the ability to act on your behalf. Now, if there is no will, and frequently there isn't, the administrator will be named by the court. And so this is you will get what is called a letter of administration. And so when there is a case where there is no will, the administrator or the personal rep will be assigned by the court, and it will be according to whatever the state laws are. So usually if it's a husband and wife, and there's no will and the husband dies, then the wife will be, usually is the one who is listed as the personal representative. If it's somebody with just children, then usually one of the children will be. If it's somebody with no children, no spouse, then it may be the parents. It just goes according to whatever the state law is. So an estate can have both a trustee and a personal representative. And sometimes that's recommended. Maybe a person has a trust and they also have, they would have a will and a trust. So the personal representative would take care of certain parts of the estate, and the trustee would only take care of what would be the assets of the trust. So a personal rep is not a trustee. A trustee is named by the trust, and the trustee is duty bound to follow the trust instrument and to manage the assets of the trust. So that would be any assets that would be going into the trust. Frequently, a personal representative is also assigned as the trustee. So they would have two different roles, but usually it's about the same. So what is a will, and what is a will and testament? It's a legal document that gives instructions to the court about how your assets should be handled and distributed when you pass. So it really matters how your assets are titled. So your estate will have to go to a probate court if your assets are not titled in a way that it would go directly to the beneficiary. So that's why a lot of people, we encourage people to make sure that they have their assets have their beneficiary designations. So an asset that would require a beneficiary designation would be insurance. So if you have an insurance policy, you would say, this insurance goes to my children, and list their names. Or an annuity, it was the same. You would have what would be called a beneficiary designation. So you would know that the annuity would be going to a specific beneficiary. Or an IRA. Another way to title your assets would be a transfer on death Or if you had a joint asset with somebody, then it would go directly to the person who is holding it jointly with you. Or if it's a TOD or a transfer on death, it would go to that person. So if you have a lot of assets that are just in your name, let's say just you have your personal name on some stock or some real estate or something like that, then even though your will would say, okay, it goes to my children, you would still have to go to probate so that the court would accept the will as valid. And then you would get a letter that would give you the ability to sell or to distribute the asset. That's just a quick thing about wills and testaments, which we could talk about, you know, an entire webinar. So what is a fiduciary? A fiduciary is any person who acts for the benefit of another. And it is also someone who must use scrupulous good faith and candor in performing duties. A fiduciary is not supposed to use their position to gain personal advantage, profit, or opportunity. So a lot of times you'll hear this name, what a fiduciary tax return, or what is, you know, a fiduciary. It's somebody who, such as a trustee, an executor, an administrator, a personal rep. Those are all considered fiduciaries. So what does a fiduciary do, or a personal rep? So there's a lot of things that they do. And so this is why it's so important to select a good person. So they need to understand the estate plan. They need to read the will. They need to read a trust, or they need to read any documents that are associated with this estate. They need to handle all financial aspects of the estate, pay off the debts, notify creditors, file and pay final tax returns. They need to keep detailed financial records of the estate assets. Oftentimes they'll need to hire an attorney. They need to obtain an IRS EIN or notify people. They need to also find beneficiaries and notify them about if there's any potential estate. Another thing they need to do is they need to gather the assets. They need to take an asset inventory. They need to take control of the assets, protect them, value them, and manage them. This could include houses. This could include investments. This could include businesses. It could include, you know, cars. Anything that belonged to the decedent would be considered an asset of the decedent. And so as a personal representative, it is your job to take control of that and to manage that, because ultimately your job is to distribute these assets to the beneficiaries. They're also required to close and finalize the estate. They need to talk to an accountant or someone to make sure that they've prepared all the proper tax returns, that they've, you know, notified the proper people, and that they've paid any taxes due. Another thing that a personal rep does is, and this is very important, is that they handle family sensitive matters for a family while they're grieving. And this is one of the hardest jobs, because when a family is grieving the death of a loved one, frequently they're very sensitive, and, you know, any little thing can set them off. So somebody who is, you know, needs to handle this, it's a very important job. So why is this an important decision? I think that you've just seen all the different tasks that you need to perform in order to be a personal representative. But it's very important, because if you don't choose the right person to manage your estate, that could mean that your estate could be mismanaged. If you don't choose someone to manage your estate by a will or another document, then the court will choose them for you. And this may not be the best choice for your estate. And like I said before previously, you know, every state law will stipulate the person who is entitled to be the administrator. So it may not be the best person. It may be somebody that you really don't want to be your administrator, but that's, you know, according to state law, this is who this will be. That's why it's so important to have a will and make a choice and have a personal representative. And we also recommend that you choose at least one person, but sometimes two, or have a successor person, because if you do, then you're guaranteed that someone will be there to manage your estate. Sometimes people will write a will 20 years, and 20 years later, the people that they've chosen are no longer around, or they're incapable of performing the duties. And so it's always important to leave some sort of information as to how you want to handle the person who will be your personal representative. Oh, and also sometimes people will choose someone and 20 years later, the person that they've chosen could have been a neighbor or a friend who is then unwilling to serve or unable to serve, or they've moved away, or, you know, there's other issues that would come up. So it is an important decision. So then the next question is, what do you look for? What's important to look for in a personal representative? Remember, look at all the jobs they have to do, and they're all pretty, you know, pretty important jobs. So let's just, the basic is they should be the age of majority. And so you don't want to have a 15-year-old do your estate. It's better to have someone who's of legal age. Also, you know, criminal status. You don't want somebody who's been arrested or who is in jail to manage your estate. You want them to be of sound mind. And of course, it's very important where they live, because dealing with an estate is a lot of work, and it's easier if it's somebody who is in the region of where you believe your estate will be. Another important question that you need to ask yourself is, will they accept this task? Are they willing to serve? Are they comfortable with your wishes? So do they have the time? You know, some people you'll ask them and they'll say, I don't have the time for that. I have a very demanding job, or I have 10 children I have to take care of. You know, you want to make sure that whoever you choose accepts the task. Then you ask yourself, is this a responsible person? Are they good at handling financial transactions and money? I guess one of the things you would look for in that is, how do they handle their own affairs? Are they, you know, good at managing money? Have they filed for bankruptcy? Are they, you know, you look at the person and find out what they, you know, how they handle their own lives. So then another question, what is their character? Are they honest? Do people like them? Are they trustworthy? It's important to look at those different traits in a person before selecting them to do a job that is a very difficult job and a lot of work. It can be very rewarding, you know, if you do it properly, but it can also be very frustrating. You know, you want someone who's mature, responsible. You want to make sure that they're healthy. You know, give it to somebody who, you know, overall is healthy, that they're, you know, younger than you are by, you know, a certain amount, maybe even a generation, so that they're still alive when the time comes. Somebody who's well organized. Also, you know, there's a lot of sensitive issues that come up with an estate. A lot of beneficiaries are very sensitive. There's, you know, you hear the stories about how families are torn apart after estates. And so will this person be able to communicate with the beneficiaries? Will they be able to keep them informed? Do they have good communication skills? Will they let people know what's going on? Because this is what helps to settle an estate is the fact that you be very transparent about everything that's going on with the estate. And I think I also touched base already with, does this person have the time to devote to administering your estate? Because you want to make sure that it gets settled and it doesn't drag on. Sometimes estates can last for years and years, especially if there's real estate or other property or if there's different disagreements about things, and it can take a long time. And one of the final questions you should ask yourself is, should this person be compensated? It's important, a lot of times if it's a family member or if you ask the person, they'll say, oh, no, you don't have to pay me. But, it's something to consider, because if a person is being compensated frequently, they will work harder or do a better job and keep records to administer your estate, if they know that, they're taking some money for that task. And then you would offer them a reasonable compensation. So this is where it comes down to, okay, who do I choose? Do I choose a family member? Do I choose an outside person? And only you know the strengths and weaknesses of your family. Only you would know who would be the best person to choose within your family. Because remember that a lot of times, if there's a large family with many kids, that there can be resentment towards the person who's chosen. And, and if you take the flip side of that, the person who's chosen may also have resentment towards everyone else because they're the ones doing all the work. And this is oftentimes why we recognize that there should be some compensation to them, because that makes it easier for them to justify their time and their effort if they have some sort of compensation. So, that's a very, very important thing to know about, is your family dynamics. And, and this is the next step. A lot of people have problems choosing amongst their children and their friends and their relatives, because oftentimes they'll say, oh, well, it should be my oldest child. Well, maybe your oldest child isn't the one that's best suited to this task. Maybe they're, live far away, or they're not very organized, or they've, been arrested, or they're spendthrift. So you need to think about, make your choice based on the other criteria that we said. But, frequently this causes problems because there's hurt feelings, there's resentment, and there's anger, sometimes amongst family. So that's why we oftentimes will tell people, if they're really concerned, that maybe they need to ask a friend or a lawyer or outside person to be the personal representative. Somebody, a cousin, or, maybe you have a close friend who's a lawyer, or an accountant who may be better suited for the job, because they're not family. And so the family can get mad at them, but in the long run, it's not going to affect the family as much, because it'll be an outside person. So, and they also don't have a vested interest. They're not a beneficiary, so they don't really care as much about what goes on, because their job, they know what their job is just to get the assets distributed. So now you've come to this point. You've said, okay, now I know who I'm going to select. I've looked at them. They look like they'll be a good personal rep. I'm going to have a will drawn up. I'm going to name this person. I'm going to name this other person as my alternate. And what do you do after you do all that? Well, you discuss it with your family, because you need to explain to them why you chose who you chose. Be transparent and let them know. Sometimes it can be a surprise. I don't know if surprises are good. You hear about these will readings where they bring out the will and then they list people, or they, have people come out, and people are shocked at who is the personal representative or who the person's chosen to manage their estate. It's better to be transparent, let people know. And then you need to work with the personal representative that you've chosen. You need to provide all the documents to them. Give them a copy of your trust. Give them a copy of your will, or at least let them know where they are. Show them the place in your house where you keep these documents. Make a list of assets that you want them to manage for you. Discuss all of these issues with your personal representative so they understand what you want. If you have a particular child that needs more help than another one, explain that to the personal rep. If you have, especially special needs or a spendthrift, or let's say, sometimes if there's a divorce in the family and you want to hold off on distributing to someone because, they may be in the middle of a divorce, you explain things to the personal representative so they understand your wishes. And then if you, excuse me, if you have any changes, let them know. If you decide later that you want to give your house to one child as opposed to another, don't change your will and not let your personal representative know. Don't add any codicils or anything to your will without forwarding a copy of that to the personal representative. Also provide your personal representative with contact information for lawyers and beneficiaries, because that's sometimes the hardest part of all this is, who do we call? What do I do? Okay, now this person has passed. Who are the beneficiaries? What do I do? It's important. Where do they live? And I can't tell you how many times we're searching for the beneficiaries and trying to find out who the lawyer was, and let them know where your documents are. Who is your accountant? Who did your taxes? Where are your tax returns? I know we'll be promoting this at the end of this this video about, we have a book called, that we can send you, where you can list all these things. This booklet, you can request at the end, and this is a very good thing to keep filled out and keep updated, because it not only talks about your assets, but your digital assets as well, which means anything you have online, your accounts, all of that would be very important for you to keep track of and have for your personal representative. And then another thing that you need to discuss after you select someone, not only with your personal representative, but with your family or the beneficiaries of your estate, is whether or not this personal representative will be compensated. Make sure it's clear so there's no disputes. Make sure that the beneficiaries know that, your neighbor Frank is going to take care of your estate and he is to be compensated. He is, let Frank, the personal representative, know you will be compensated. You are to provide detailed records on what you do. So this is, something that's should be handled up front so that people know. So Frank, the personal rep, who's the neighbor, will provide documents that say, I spent 40 hours, managing the estate, and I'm to be paid however much they decide per hour for this job. I think more than ever, it's important to let people know about that up front, because frequently there are disputes about that, and that can hold up the closing of an estate. So what are the potential issues? So there's a lot of issues that can come up during the settling of estate. You've written your will, you've chosen your personal rep, you've talked to your family, but maybe it's 10 years down the road and the personal rep has moved away, or there could be an issue where the beneficiaries feel mistrust towards the personal rep because they're not telling them things. They're not letting us know what's going on. You'll see a lot of times beneficiaries will say, where's my distribution? How much, when can I expect a distribution? This is very important. And it's also important for the personal representative to let the beneficiaries know if they will be receiving any tax documents that they'll have to report on their personal tax returns. That's, a lot of times beneficiaries will be shocked. They'll get a K-1 or another document and they'll say, well, this has to be on your tax return. And they had no prior knowledge of this. So a personal rep should be transparent. Another problem is that sometimes they're just slow. You know, they take their time. Maybe they take 2 or 3 years to sell a house. Maybe they just don't have the time, or it just, there's other issues that come up that would cause an estate to take time to sell an asset. So that's why frequently it's better to not choose a business partner or a beneficiary to do the job, because then if you anticipate a problem, like with a business or with you know, land or a farm or something like that, it's probably better to choose somebody else to do that, not a beneficiary or a partner. Because remember, a personal representative, if they don't do their job, if they don't work in the best interest of the estate or the beneficiaries, they could go to court. And you, as a personal rep, you are responsible for doing your duty. You are a fiduciary. And go back to, what is a fiduciary? A fiduciary has to work for the benefit of the estate and the beneficiaries. So we've talked about the issues. Now we know. So you think, well, maybe it's not good to choose a family or a friend. Maybe I should choose a professional fiduciary. So there's a lot of options for a professional fiduciary. There's trust companies, there's banks, law firms, lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors. And all of them are good options, but you have to shop around. You have to talk to them, find out what are their fees, what services do they provide. You need to talk to several types of organization, and you can see on the other side I have, what is your approach? Do you want a corporate trust company, bank, law firm, or would you rather have more of a hands-on? Maybe you have an accountant or a lawyer who's you've dealt with for many years, and they're a personal, someone you've known. They would have more of a hands-on approach to the estate as opposed to a corporate, which would be a little bit colder. So we talk about, should you choose a professional fiduciary? And this is an important question. I mean, it would help you to reduce conflicts amongst a family, especially if there's a lot of problems within the family. If you anticipate that there could be disagreements, what are the pros? Well, of course, their experience. They're professionals. They know how to deal with this. They have the time, they understand the laws, and they have a network of reputable service providers. A professional company, if something came up, they'd know who a lawyer was, they'd know who an investment advisor was, they'd know who an accountant was, who could help you with the estate. It's if you have no one else to appoint. Some people have no children, no spouse, maybe they live alone. If they have no one to appoint, then maybe it's best to have a professional fiduciary do the job. Sometimes they want to leave their estate to charity. And oftentimes when people do that, they will choose a professional fiduciary. A professional would be knowledgeable, they'd be prudent, and they'd be neutral. So it's important, it's important to know that they're also licensed and bonded, and they are required to provide a high standard of care. But with everything, there's also cons. And the con for this, a professional fiduciary, is that they must be compensated. And these fees can add up. Remember, a lawyer, their hourly fee can be quite high. And a lot of times the corporate trust advisors can have quite high fees too. And so this can really take away from the assets of the estate and can be upsetting to the beneficiaries when they see these fees adding up. They also aren't going to be as flexible as, say, an individual. If there's some asset that needs to be sold or you don't want to sell for a while, a lot of times their job as the fiduciary is to go according to the will or to the trust. And so, there might be an issue where a beneficiary wants them to hold on to something for a while, and that could be upsetting to them if the if you have a professional fiduciary and they're very strict, or like I said, my next item is bureaucratic. They can be very bureaucratic and they can be hard to contact. Sometimes they're a little bit slow if they have to get approval for things. So although they can help a lot with, different things and help to eliminate some of disagreements amongst the family, on the other hand, they may not understand the family. They may not understand what they need, and they may not understand everything about what's important to the family. So there are definite pros and cons to a professional fiduciary. So I think I talked a little bit earlier about when I'm gone, and this is a book that we have put together that we can send to you that you would be able to fill out. It's a bound book, and put in all the information that you would need to give to your personal representative once you've filled out a will. It's just a good way to get you to think about your assets and what's important, because oftentimes people don't always think about certain things like, what's my password for my bank account? Where do I get my statements for my annuity? Who are the beneficiary designations for my IRA? All of those things are important for your personal representative to know, so that they can do what they need to do for your estate. So I think now, if people have questions, I know this is very brief talk about this, but I can answer questions at any time. So, okay. Does anybody have any questions?
Cindy, Tom had a question on if you can define reasonable compensation for personal representative. Is that hourly, a lump sum, or do you have another idea?
Okay, usually what I tell people to do is a reasonable compensation can be anywhere from, like, say $20 to $50 per hour, and that they would charge mileage. So they would use the standard rate that would be used for tax purposes. I think it's 58 cents a mile right now. So, and then there would be other expenses. Let's say if they mail documents or ship documents or whatever. Remember that fiduciary fees, or this reasonable compensation, is an expense of the estate and is also a deduction on the estate. So, and on the other hand, if you're a personal representative for somebody, you also have to take this as income on your personal return. So this is why a lot of times, if it's a family member, they don't charge any sort of personal compensation, because they don't want to take it as income. But then you have the other hand where you can take it as a deduction. So it's kind of a fine line. But I would say anywhere between $20 to $50, depending on who the personal representative is. If it's somebody who, a daughter or a son who is an accountant or a lawyer, you can give a little more depending on, how you feel. Are there any more questions, Kim?
That's all that came in through the chat, but if there's any other questions that people might have for Cindy, you can definitely unmute yourself and discuss with Cindy, or I guess what would work good as well is you can email me. I just put my email address in the chat, and then I can get you connected with Cindy for any further questions. Also, for the When I'm Gone book, email me your address if you'd like us to mail you a hard copy. Otherwise, I put the electronic copy link in the chat as well. But if there's nothing else, then we can definitely sign off. Maybe we'll just give a couple minutes with anybody, if anybody has any questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
Anybody has any questions, you can ask me directly.
What do you consider reasonable compensation?
Reasonable would be, you don't want to pay them $5 an hour. You would want to pay them, we usually say anywhere between $20 to $50 an hour for work done. So let's say they spend 2 hours going to the broker to organize things, or they spend time, going through belongings in the house and taking them to Goodwill. You can have different compensation according to what you want. I could also go and do a little bit more research, but it depends on the tasks that they're doing. So reasonable, frequently people will send me their time and will say, okay, you've done 30 hours of work for the estate at $30 an hour. So then we give them $900 and pay it from the estate. That would be a reasonable compensation. Sometimes people will just charge a flat fee. They'll say, well, I'm done. I'm just going to charge $1,000, and then maybe they don't want to provide any backup, or they just want a set amount. So it just depends on, and the individual may choose that. They may tell you, I want to compensate the personal representative a flat amount, like $1,000 or $2,000.
Okay, Cindy, well, thank you very much for that presentation and helping us all learn a little bit more about how we can choose a personal representative that can fit us properly. If anybody has any further questions or something comes up, please feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, thank you for attending, and this recording will be emailed out. So thank you, Cindy.